And it's about making yourself look unattractive to those bad actors by putting controls in place. What you've got to really make sure you're doing here is not introducing lots of friction into that front end process, because that then starts impacting your top line in terms of sales. The East African economy particularly, perhaps M-Pesa agents recording transactions on paper with national identity numbers and M-Pesa numbers in the books in their offices. There's lots of opportunities for data to leak. And as that data leak, it becomes available to bad actors, and then bad actors can use it against a simple process. AI, yes, is being used by organizations to combat bad actors, but we're also seeing fraudsters innovate ahead of the curve. We're seeing fraudsters leverage AI probably more than the tech industry is leveraging AI. And what we're doing there really is helping clients make decisions about an identity that's been presented to them, and that's 100 million people who we've been able to provide secure access to for products and services, financial products, other kinds of products.
How do you measure success? And I'm thinking about maybe the context of what we're doing right now, what you've done in the past. How do you measure success around the kind of solutions you've been involved in? Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Pure Digital Passion Podcast with me, Moses Kemibaro. My guest today is Rob Meakin, coming to us from Creditinfo Group, where he's the Director of Fraud and Identity. Rob's career spans various verticals from energy to credit, and he's led innovations in fraud management and digital identity across the UK and globally. Thank you for joining us, Rob.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So, Rob, I want us to go a little bit back into a little bit of history, a little bit of your origin story. Who's Rob? What's your background? How did you end up in this space? And I'd just like to know a little bit more about your personality and sort of your background from that perspective.
Originally I embarked on a teaching career. So I used to teach high school chemistry.
Oh, really? Wow.
Not for very long, because I soon discovered children don't like me, and I developed a bit of a dislike for children.
Okay.
So then I moved on into a customer service career in the energy companies, in the energy sector. In customer facing roles, really driving sort of a customer centric culture, and then spread out into other areas of the business, looking for ways to improve customer experience, looking for ways to improve business performance, and right from the start, really looking at things that were going wrong with the business, things that were going wrong with that customer experience, things that were driving cost for the business. Over time, building up strategies to resolve some of those underlying root causes, and that's kind of set the scene really for the rest of my career, really over the past sort of 20 years. So, looking for the root cause of problems and then resolving it. And as I moved out of the energy sector, I was looking at credit risk decisions. And it was quite clear that you could actually significantly change the performance of the business in terms of bad debt and customer experience by being more careful about some of the decisions that you made in the credit risk space right at the start of the relationship. And that's really what I took into TransUnion with me. We had some great success at TransUnion. So over the course of 10, 12 years, we started from an embryonic identity business. TransUnion in the UK had a credit reference business, and we were making credit decisions for clients, but not identity decisions. And that coincided really with the strengthening of money laundering regulations in the UK, and that was driving this need then for making identity decisions. So we grew that business really from maybe doing 100,000 inquiries a year and helping 100,000 decisions through to over 100 million in the course of that period. So, and what we're doing there really is helping clients make decisions about an identity that's been presented to them. And that's 100 million people who we've been able to, provide secure access to into, for products and services, financial products, other kinds of products. And that's really what the move to Creditinfo that's what's driven that, really, because we're looking at, we've got a business here that helps clients make decisions about credit, but historically, we've not had that fraud and identity angle in terms of using the data that we've got to make decisions about identity and help clients, identify any risk in the customers they're onboarding. And if you look across the markets that we operate in globally, we've got quite a diverse geographical mix from markets that have really well-established digital economies, strong anti-money laundering regulations. They attract fraudsters because the size of the economy is significant. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we've got slightly less developed digital economies that are perhaps more vulnerable to fraudsters, and have less mature money laundering, anti-money laundering regimes. So, if we look at the opportunity that we've got as Creditinfo, we look after an enormous amount of data from a consumer data, from an information company perspective. That's really valuable in the fraud and identity space. And we can leverage that on top of the technology that we've already deployed into our clients' organizations for making credit decisions. And we can use that, the data that we've got, and help clients make decisions about identity and fraud, and establish that trust in the first stage of the relationship and get it right from the start of that relationship.
So what I'm lacking is that when you think about the global aspects of this business, and then you have customers and markets at different levels of maturity around these areas, the beauty about it is that there's a lot of things that you now know, like moving from 100,000 to 100 million data scenarios for different consumers, such that when you come, say, to a market like Kenya or Tanzania or Uganda, presumably you're able to sort of show them the way, or ideally guide them around your clients, the financial institutions, around how best to deploy some of these propositions, right?
I mean, we can certainly bring learnings from other markets, but
yeah.
I mean, I guess, if you look across the East African markets that we operate in, there's a diversity of challenges that clients face, and they're not necessarily the same challenges that organisations face in the UK. But certainly that cross-fertilisation of ideas is useful, and we are certainly moving in the direction that we moved in the UK business, where we're seeing organisations here start opening up digital channels for consumer interactions and onboarding customers digitally, and that gives clients an edge in terms of competitive advantage. If you can make it easy for a consumer to interact with you, then they're going to choose you as an organisation to set an account up with, rather than the one that has more friction associated with the onboarding. So that's certainly a learning that we had in the UK over that period where we developed the solutions in the UK. It was that focus on easily establishing trust in an identity that's presented to you in a digital channel where you're not face to face. And those digital channels are far more vulnerable to exploitation by bad actors because it's scalable.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult to walk around 10 different branches of a bank with forged identity documents and present it's a very different proposition. If you've got a big spreadsheet of 10,000 national identity numbers and names and dates of birth, you can set an AI bot on that, and away you go. That's a scalable business, and that's the big challenge with the digital channels, is that you're starting to expose yourself to more risk because you're making it easier for everyone to interact with you. So it's not just fraud, not just genuine customers that are finding it easy to interact with you. The fraudsters leap on that as an opportunity. So there's real benefits from digitization for organizations, as well as regional economies. Giving people access to those services and helping people access those services, helps the economy.
And I think it's more than financial services, isn't it? It's the fact that identity unlocks many other things, including even government services, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, ultimately. So maybe that brings me to the next question, actually, which is how do you define trust in the context of today's financial services?
If you're as an organization starting a relationship with somebody you don't know, then you've got to answer really three simple questions. This person's presenting an identity to me. Is that a real identity, or is it some kind of synthesized identity? So that's the first of the questions. Next question is, well, is that person who's presenting that identity to me the owner of that identity? And then the third question, are there any particular risk signals associated with the identity? So in the context of money laundering, is that individual a politically exposed person? Is that individual a sanctioned individual that I'm not really supposed to be doing business with? Are there any anomalies in the data that sits around that identity that look suspicious? So inconsistencies in personal data, anomalies with the device that they're using, the location of the device, for instance. So all of those features. It's not just a name and date of birth and national identity number. I mean, historically, that's what people viewed as an identity. It's that you turn up with your name and address, and they offer you a service. Identity nowadays is far broader than that. It's not just your name and address. It's your email address, your mobile phone number, any social media accounts you're connected to, a whole range of attributes that contribute to your identity. And in a digital world, establishing trust is making sure that there aren't any consistencies across that broader identity.
Fantastic. So I want to talk a little bit about the reason you're here in Nairobi right now, which is you're launching this new identity and fraud proposition. And I want to maybe think about, how does this play a role in preventing fraud and also in onboarding customers, specifically initially in Kenya, but also in the broader East African region?
So, going back to the digitization points, as you start opening up that channel, it comes with costs. So you look at the way costs drive out of this. You've obviously the obvious cost is in fraud losses. Typically, that's showing up as credit risk loss, so correct. Bad debt. But really, it's fraudsters. So people who apply for lending facilities with no intention of paying them, and then third-party fraud, where you've got somebody impersonating and using a stolen identity to get that lending. So those fraud costs show up on and start to impact the business. But it's not only those fraud costs; it's also the cost of operating all of the controls in the back office around reviewing cases or investigating fraud cases. And then you've got the costs of lost sales. So you put a lot of money into advertising, you're bringing customers into your business, and they end up being fraudsters. So there's acquisition costs, and also if you make the front end processes really very high friction, then you start losing customers because they abandon the process. So there's a lost sales cost, as well as the fraud costs, as well as the control costs. So there's a significant level of cost in there. Our solutions now that we're launching today focus on really three simple things. Making it easy for consumers to interact with organizations when they're onboarding them, making life difficult for bad actors and establishing a hostile environment for bad actors, so that's fraudsters and money laundering, and making it easy then for fraud fighters to implement the controls that they need. So, as we build out the solutions, we're bringing together a whole range of different services in one API connection. So an organization can consume a whole range of insight from multiple sources, all through a simple connection.
Great. When you look at the African scenario, what sort of unique security challenges do you face here when it comes to digital identity management?
So I think there's probably there's opportunities and challenges. So, my observations really from, interactions over the past couple of months with particularly here in Kenya, is that, there are lots of services available. The government have built out a whole range of services that enable you to cross-check digitally various aspects of your identity. So, the tax authorities, the immigration service, the driving agency, and there are also industry databases. So there's a lot of services that contribute into establishing trust in an identity. But also, I think that one of the real challenges is that there's been this over-reliance on simple ID verification based around the national identity and the name. And this over-reliance, I think, has bred some kind of complacency where, organizations perhaps think that that's the robust IDV process that they're working through, because they've been able to cross-check that identity against the government service. But that simple two-variable verification, I think, just introduces a level of vulnerability from a bad actor's perspective. They're easy to get hold of that data. If you look at the almost exponential increase in data breaches over the past few years. I mean, there's a six-fold increase in data breaches in Kenya through year on year through to the middle of last year. That data is available easily to fraudsters. They can buy it on the dark web. And I think there's also, within the East African economy particularly, where you have perhaps M-Pesa agents recording transactions on paper with national identity numbers and M-Pesa numbers in the books in their offices. There's lots of opportunities for data to leak.
Yeah.
And as that data leak, it becomes available to bad actors, and then bad actors can use it against a simple process just to get through it. If you've got somebody's identity number and their name, all of a sudden you can get through some of these processes that are in place at the minute using the solutions that are available. And what we're doing within the solution that we're launching today is bringing together a whole range of digital identity attributes. So not just the national identity number and the name, but email addresses, mobile numbers, everything that sits around the identity digitally.
So what you're saying is that this new proposition ultimately is providing more data points, a more robust, more holistic way of determining if somebody is who they say they are.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at what a bad actor needs to do now to synthesize a genuine-looking identity, if you're examining 10 different social media and messaging profiles and querying government databases and querying industry registries and leveraging all of the consumer data that Creditinfo hold as a credit bureau, bringing all of that together and cross-correlating, cross-checking between all of those sources, then that's a far more difficult identity for a bad actor to synthesize. And it's easier to spot those anomalies because you're looking across multiple sources. And that's really what our solution is doing. It's bringing all of those services together and then applying more advanced decision analytics across all of those data sources to identify those anomalies.
How significantly is this different? I know you talked about IDs or maybe driver's licenses or maybe the IPRS system with immigration being kind of like the single source of truth in most instances for the kind of organizations you serve. But would you be therefore saying that if you're looking at it in terms of how much more effective your solution is relative to that, would this be many, many miles ahead of the current status quo?
I think so. Could I put a number on it? Probably not. But it really is about making your organization look unattractive to bad actors. If it's difficult for them, if they'll take their 1,000 records that they've bought on the dark web, they'll try your organization with those 1,000 records. If 2 or 3 get through, then they'll be thinking, actually, I'll go somewhere else.
Too much of a hassle.
Yeah, and it's about making yourself look unattractive to those bad actors by putting controls in place. But what you've got to really make sure you're doing here is not introducing lots of friction into that front end process, because that then starts impacting your top line in terms of sales. You got to try and make these controls work silently in the background based on information that the consumer would be giving you anyway, and that's what makes the difference. You're checking across multiple sources using simple data that you've been provided with and that consumers would expect to provide you with, and not really introducing any additional friction into that front process.
So let's talk a little bit about strategic execution, Rob. I know you've worked on strategic product roadmaps, double-digit growth. How do you measure success? And I'm thinking about maybe the context of what we're doing right now, what you've done in the past. How do you measure success around the kind of solutions you've been involved in?
Adoption and client success.
Ultimately, bottom line. And when you say that, a product is successful, I mean, what are some of the attributes that do make them successful? Are there any specific ingredients that you've seen over time that maybe are able to more or less tell you that this is going to be successful?
So I think, in the fraud space, it's clearly, seeing organizations able to grow and reduce their fraud costs.
Concurrently. So growth this way, fraud going the other way. So that's pretty much the main driver behind that.
Yeah.
Which means the solution has to be pretty good to actually reduce even as it grows.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. And then what role does customer journey design play into fraud prevention? I know you've mentioned something pretty profound, which is one of the best deterrents is not be an attractive target, as it were. But are there any other things that you see within the customer journey design that are sort of key components of making fraud prevention more effective?
So I think for me, it's about getting it right at the start of that relationship. We've seen historically organizations onboard consumers without any lending facility, and then subsequently open up a lending facility, and that's a vulnerability that fraudsters will exploit. They'll open that initial account and then move forward. And I think what organizations need to do in terms of the customer journey is to make sure they get it right at the start. Make that assessment right at the start of the relationship. Even if the customer isn't immediately wanting to take out any lending facilities, it's about getting it right at the start.
So the onboarding itself needs to have all the vetting done, ensure that this person is actually the right person, and then take it from there.
Yeah, and once you've established that trust right at the start of the relationship, then that makes it easier throughout your relationship with that customer.
So obviously you're in a very dynamic space, and I'm sure also the bad actors are constantly playing catch up, trying new things. What are your predictions for fraud technology in the next 5 years or so? What do you see coming? I'm sure AI is going to be mentioned in this moment, but I'm sure there's certain trends or scenarios that you're seeing coming.
So, I think the rate of change is significant at the minute, right? So 5 years, probably need a time machine to predict that far ahead.
That's the rate of progression that you see.
Yeah. I look at my kids and they're sort of in their teens, and I think, what's the world going to be like when they come out of university? And it's going to be a completely different world. But so AI, and we're seeing that now, and where AI, yes, is being used by organizations to combat bad actors, but we're also seeing fraudsters innovate ahead of the curve. And we're seeing fraudsters leverage AI probably more than the tech industry is leveraging AI. Using it to analyze data breach files, to pinpoint specific cases that are going to be easy to exploit, exploring customer onboarding processes to see where the vulnerabilities are within organizations' processes, generating fake IDs, generating fake voice cloning, and so we're seeing fraudsters probably innovate at a faster pace than organizations are able to, and we're also seeing more and more collaboration between different groups of bad actors. So it's almost a
consortium of sorts, huh?
Yeah, between say people who are money laundering on behalf of organized crime, and and then fraudsters and cyber criminals working together. And it's all coming together, and you can go out and buy a fraud package as a service in the same way as you can go out and buy a SaaS solution. Yeah, so you can rent a cloud-based service that will do the cybersecurity breaches. Will give you money laundering options. You just buy it out of the box. So this fraud as a service is becoming more and more of a challenge, and the cybersecurity aspects of that, I think, as we see compute power increase, we'll get to the point where it's going to be far easier for cyber criminals to start hacking into systems, because they'll be able to use more powerful compute technology to get through some of those defenses.
It's so funny because I think it was last year I was at a conference on cybersecurity, and I think, of course, AI was in the room as part of the one of the big things that's happening there. And they kept saying, like, we literally have a scenario where it's who's building the better AI, and it's almost like AIs are now hacking other AIs in order to sort of determine. So you're trying to block with an AI, this person's trying to attack with an AI, and it's kind of interesting. And they say that the rate of progression is so ridiculous in terms of the threats that a human couldn't keep up with it anymore. You have to use an AI now to do it. I don't know. That's also the same thing that you're experiencing.
Yeah, I mean that's. I mean, is that the case here and now today? It's probably not that advanced in terms of, that vision you just painted, where you've got AIs fighting out in cyberspace.
Yeah.
But I mean, conceivably, it could get to that within the next few years, where they're moving that quickly. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe the last thing, if you can share with us, any lessons learned from sort of building secure, scalable credit ecosystems? Any things that maybe you think our audience would find valuable knowing from that experience?
You've got to make the most out of the information that you have, and to do that, you've got to take little bits of data and drive great insight out of them, and whether that's using more advanced analytics or reaching out to multiple services, that's the key, I think.
Ultimately.
So I don't know whether this will land in Kenya, but there's a saying in English, weaving gold out of straw. So that's really what I think organisations should be doing, is making the most of little bits of information and driving the maximum amount of insight out of it.
So use your data to inform what you're moving forward with ultimately. Yeah. Rob, thanks so much. It's been exceptional talking to you. I mean, your insights sound profound. And I think in terms of understanding the whole digital trust identity space, I think clearly there's so much opportunity for Kenya and the region, but I'm really looking forward again to the launch later today and really learning more about how this is going to add value to the local ecosystem.
Thanks. Yeah. A pleasure.
So there you've heard it from Rob, somebody who's an expert within the digital trust space and also identity and fraud. They're going to be launching later, the new proposition for KYC in Kenya that's going to gradually roll out across the region. I hope you found value in this conversation, and I definitely look forward to catching you in the next one. Thank you so much for joining us.